Welcome in, folks, to another great episode of I've Got a Theory. I'm your host, Henish. I'm excited to have on Will Jackson, another local San Diegan, here on the show with me. Will, thanks for joining me.
Thank you, sir. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, Will is, being humble, but he is a business owner. He owns an MMA gym. He's a local entrepreneur. And I think most importantly, what he really wants to convey is that he cares about people. And I think his theory is going to kind of be a testament to that. So, Will, take it away.
All right. Well, I have a theory that financial literacy is probably the number one issue that's negatively impacting our underserved communities. Not just in San Diego, but throughout the country. And I think that it's something that doesn't get enough publicity. It's not talked about enough. And I think if you just focus on, I don't hate the mainstream media. I think it has its place. But if you just focus on kind of the narrative that's kind of being presented through the mainstream media, it would have you believe that there's a lot of other issues that are negatively impacting our communities, and I don't think financial literacy would be very high up on the list. And to full disclosure, I've had a tiny bit of success in business, but I don't proclaim to be any sort of mogul or anything like that. But entrepreneurialism and financial literacy changed my life, completely changed my life.
So how did you learn?
How did I learn? You know what? I think a couple things. I think I've been extraordinarily lucky. I've had some amazing individuals in my life that have helped me, that have mentored me. I've been privileged in that way. My parents were not particularly financially literate, but I was able to align myself with some amazing mentors throughout my life that have helped me. They opened some doors for me. And then, from there, it was just, personal education, reading books. I'm not a good student, never was, I just told a story in one of my classes the other day. I got my first A in 7th grade. School was always very challenging for me. I was labeled really early on as not being, particularly, studious in that capacity. But I just started reading as I became an adult. Started reading, started learning things on my own. And then a whole world kind of opened up to me. And
Did you ever have a job before you started your own business?
Did I have a job before I started one? I've been in the martial arts industry my entire life, in various different ways. Whether I'm, just, teaching, working for somebody else, or whether I am running my own small program, various, other gyms, or doing the independent contractor route, personal training. I did private lessons for a long time. I've done every job there is to do in the martial arts industry. It's really been this full spectrum.
So now you have a business that ideally runs itself, but you're still you're involved day to day every time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you're still involved. So, Will, I have a feeling that the financial literacy wool has been over our eyes for years by purpose, right? We have this curriculum that we allow kids to learn, right? And it's in the media right now, right? We're recording in June 2021. And it's in the media right now about critical race theory.
Sure.
Right? And there's a big debate about whether you should teach about this or not. Well, I don't get this. Like, if it's a fact, aren't you supposed to teach facts? If it's a historical fact, you're supposed to teach it, right? And like when we teach math, we have no problem spending a year teaching trigonometry and sine and cosine and geometry and how biological chemical reactions work. But guess what? When you're trying to figure out how you're going to pay your bills, none of that matters. How come we don't spend even a week on how to balance your checkbook?
It's a great question. And I think these conversations always come back to that. It's like, why isn't this taught in schools? I'm going to argue it's never going to be taught in schools. And I'm not talking about charter schools where they have niche programs and things like that. We're talking about on a general macro scale. It's never going to be taught in schools.
Why do you think that?
I think a couple of reasons. I think I would like to see it taught in school. So full disclosure, let me say that. I think people don't understand the role of school. I think school is one of those things that hasn't been reinvented for a long time. We essentially have the same systems and the same processes we had 100 years ago, some 200 years ago. And I'm with all that. I get all that. But I think the role of school, I think how we think about the role of school needs to change. I think we expect too much out of our teachers. And I think teaching a student, a young person, everything that they need to know in order to be successful in life, I think that's too much. I think it's too much. I don't think that they can handle it. I don't think they have the resources for it. And I don't even think it's their responsibility. And I know I may be in the minority on that.
But you
I
don't even think
think
a high schooler at senior year, before they go to college and are allowed to get their own credit card and rack up their own $500,000 in student debt, should have a better understanding of what they're signing up for?
absolutely. I think there's a baseline level of understanding that I think everyone should have, right? However, I think in order to, level up, in order to get to the next level, I don't think schools are equipped to teach that. I think what schools are designed to do, and maybe we can talk about ways to, evolve the system, but I think schools are designed to teach people how to learn. They're designed to teach people how to study. They're designed to teach people, how to understand the academic process. And I think at some point, and I don't know exactly when that is. At some point, people have to take personal responsibility for learning the necessary skills in order to accomplish and acquire the things that they want, right? And I don't know that we're set up to have elementary schools or high schools to teach everything, right? Now,
I feel like I could do it in 10 hours. I bet you I could teach anyone that knows nothing, that it's at least 15, 16 years old. I could teach you how to read your credit report in less than 1 hour, right? One. Two, I could teach you the fundamentals of how loans and or credit cards work in 1 to 2 hours. Just a basic high level. Here's what APR means. Here's what interest means. Here's what making your minimum payment means, right? Here's what your balance means. Here's what your credit score does for you. I'm having that conversation right now with people that are over 40 years old because
sure,
they still don't know, right? And they might have businesses that are making $20,000, $30,000 a month, and they still don't understand how their credit score is calculated when it's a simple lesson, right? When I explain it to them and it takes me 20 minutes, they're like, oh, I didn't know that. Why?
sure,
Well,
sure,
one, they didn't look into it. Two, there wasn't someone like me that was able to explain it to them. I think, and I'm a conspiracy theorist, right? And I'll say this out loud. I think that the um, the powers that be purposefully do information asymmetry, right? This is how you capitalize on people to go spend your money, right? Guess what makes you happy? Buying stuff. Oh, you don't have money? Guess what? We'll get you a credit card and then you can go buy stuff that'll make you happy, right? And we're not
sure.
going to tell you that, oh, by the way, you're going to have to pay on that and it's a 23% interest rate,
Right,
right? And we're going to have to, oh, if you got problems, call tax attorney, file bankruptcy, and so they don't teach you how to budget, right? And that's a simple thing that kids start to learn, right? If you start getting an allowance, like, okay, how much money can I spend on candy and toys? Because I also want to spend a couple bucks on a meal, and
right,
it's that kind of thing that ideally parents do teach kids. But, like you said, your parents, nor my parents, nor a lot of people's parents have a high enough level of financial literacy to be able to pass that on to their children either.
sure,
Right.
sure,
And so the curriculum has changed, right? Hasn't it, Will? Because now we're teaching people engineering. We're teaching people DNA engineering and CRISPR and space and robotics and artificial intelligence and computer programming. So we're updating it to these things which are relevant, those are relevant to finding out if you like those things so you can pursue them and get a job that pays you six figures or more, because anything that's related to computers and science and engineering is a nice job because it's high demand, it's high skill, and it takes a little bit of work. um, but even those people at that level can be deep in debt because they got a fat job, and next thing you want to know, they want to buy a BMW. Right now, they got an $800 monthly payment, and then they
sure,
want to buy a nice condo downtown, and that's $600,000. Now that's $4,000 a month, right? And so next thing you know, they're living check to check, even if they are making six figures because they didn't learn the basics of budgeting,
sure, sure.
right? And so I think it's done on purpose to get people to keep spending money because that's what our economy is based off of.
Absolutely. You know what? I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think where the challenge is, what is the role that the family has, with financial literacy, right? And the reason why I bring it back to the family is because families that I won't even say have a deep understanding of financial literacy, but have a deep appreciation for the power of accumulating wealth, those children tend to do better. And what we learn from an academic perspective is learning outcomes, even academic outcomes, are more closely related to the culture at home than they are to the processes that take place, in a formal academic environment.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah, I agree.
So the question is, even if we do get it, even if we are able to successfully teach a baseline level of financial literacy in schools, which I would support, if learning outcomes are more closely related to the culture at home, well, then how do we get the message to the kids at home? How do we get the message to parents to pass it on to their kids, right? And again, in financial literacy is one way to describe it, but it's not even financial literacy. It's just the desire to accomplish, desire to acquire more, right? And we see that in certain cultures, that messaging is very, very prevalent. In certain cultures, it's not. Now, if we have a conversation about specifically which cultures it's prevalent, then that's politically incorrect.
Yeah.
Well, we all know that there's certain cultures that talk specifically about this, and it's an important part of their culture. In certain cultures, it isn't as much, right? And it negatively impacts everything about that person's life moving forward.
Trying to turn my fan off in my office. Give me a second here. Okay. Yeah, I mean, so the different. I wonder if there are different cultures that teach it better, because I think there are, right? I think some of these, like, there's cultures where they have less debt, and if you look at U.S. debt right now, that gives you an overall indication of how bad our financial literacy is, right?
Absolutely.
We over $1 trillion in car loans. We over $1 trillion in student loans. We over $1 trillion in credit cards.
Sure.
So we get three plus trillion dollars in debt of things that, yeah, people would say school is important, but if you're going to pay $200,000 plus for school and to get a job that's going to pay you $40,000 a year, I don't know how that math works. There's no financial literacy in the world where that works out.
Right.
And so it is tough, because once you start understanding it, and I'm still learning, right? And I'll admit I keep having to upgrade my accountants and CFOs and things like that to help me understand my financial picture, because I own a few businesses and I'm trying to figure out how to keep more of that money, make sure I'm spending it the proper way. How am I allocating it properly so I don't get dinged on taxes more than I need to, right? I'm okay with paying taxes, but I don't want to pay more than I need to, right?
Sure.
That's for sure, right? It makes sense. But this is something that it takes a lot of skill, but the baseline stuff, like understanding how to budget, understanding how much you should be spending on something. Yeah, it's really annoying, because so you mentioned earlier that you feel like this affects less affluent and kids more acutely, right? It affects kids that are poor more acutely because they don't have middle income or rich income parents to teach them anything different. Right. So then who's their financial role model? It's people that might have cash on them, right? And if you got a stack of cash, you look like you know what you're doing with your money.
Right.
Which probably isn't the case.
We're in the low hanging fruit, right? That's the easy thing to do. Easy thing to do, as you mentioned, is to go out there and get a car loan, right?
Right.
But I'm so big on it, transcending school. I'm really big on it transcending school. School is just it. They say education in some ways is wasted on the young, right? And as you get older, you realize the importance of education. Like, wow, I want to continue learning every single day. As a kid, we don't necessarily look at it that way, right? But I'm so big on moving this, not necessarily out of the school system. I want some baseline level of education there, but I want to bring it into mainstream culture, right? Yeah. I want families to think this is a cool thing to talk about, right? Yeah. And some do, and the outcomes are different, right? In the same way that, some cultures, education is valued on a very, very high level. And you see that the academic outcomes are significantly different, right? And their financial outcomes based on the education are significantly different. So it's moving it, not even moving it, but it's just making it part of, mainstream culture, to make it cool to talk about financial literacy, with your children, because that's where the learning is happening, right? The data is already there. We know that people aren't getting it from schools, right? So how do we get it into the family? Right, because once it's in the family, right, it's much more likely for it to become part of your instinct, part of your identity, part of your culture.
Yeah. Do you see any of these kind of things going on? Do you see workshops for kids, for families, for parents, for adults? Because I don't. That's the tough thing. Is like I keep my eyes open for stuff like that, and the only times you'll hear things like get a financial consultant, like it's kind of also lead bait for financial advisors that are trying to sell you on life insurance, which may or may not be a good idea for you. But it's tough because you're like, I don't know if I can trust this financial literacy workshop because someone's going to try to sell me something that I might not want.
Well,
Right.
let me say this. I would ask, what informs culture, right? And I would suggest that music informs culture. I would suggest social media informs culture. I would suggest that Hollywood informs culture, right? And if I look at specifically, I'm biracial. I'm half black. I'm half white. If you look at specifically, hip hop culture, doesn't always present the best message, for financial literacy. It presents, stunting. It presents, taking on debt. It presents an imagery that seems, very, very interesting and exciting, but it doesn't necessarily promote literacy, right? So when I think of like, how do we get this into the culture of, the next generation of people? It's social media, it's music, it's Hollywood, it's movies, it's all of that imagery that is really influential to people.
That's true. And you don't hear that as much. Maybe sometimes you hear in a TI line where he says, I break down companies with all my peeps, right? At least he indicates that he's got people that he talks to break down his companies.
Absolutely.
I heard a Drake line yesterday that made me laugh, but that's how Drake does it. But he said basically is like, I can't relate. I'm not saying the line right, but he's like, I can't relate to people that got more followers than dollars.
Right. Sure.
Like cool, you're cool on Instagram, but you're still broke and you're pretending like you're rich because you got on Yeezys from you might have bought from China. You might have paid $500 from, who knows?
That's right. And there's definitely a disconnection between actual currency and social media currency. It's not to suggest that there's no relation. There is a relation, right? But often, there was a study that was done where you asked high school students, would you rather have $1 million or 1 million followers, right?
Interesting.
And most people that, I would say have any level of financial literacy would say, oh, just the interest on $1 million alone, I'm taking that.
Right.
All of the high school students said they'd rather have 1 million followers. Now, I'm not suggesting you can't leverage that 1 million followers into something that could potentially be lucrative, right? But it's just a different psychology. It's just a different way of thinking because of the way that we're programmed by social media to believe that that's real currency.
That's interesting, because I was having thoughts about currency the other day and just how much it relates to time, right? For a lot of people, you go to a job and you get paid hourly. That's kind of standard thing for 80+% of people that have a job. For guys like us, we're self-employed, and so we end up working way too much and probably getting paid way too little per hour. But ideally, we're building something that's going to last or something like that. But yeah, because money is time. You hear people say that cliche all the time, but when you think about it, and you're like, when something breaks in your house, like crap, I got to spend another $100 to replace that, and like that's X amount of my time I have to waste to make that money to fix this thing that I broke or that someone else broke in my house, right? And I always try to think about it in times like, oh, it's $1,000 for this. I'm like, well, that's this much amount of my time that I have to spend to make that money in compensation for whatever just happened that I need to replace. And you never think about it that way. But with the social media, it's interesting because it's very similar to consumerism, which says that the more you have, the happier you should be. Right. But it's never ending. You'll never reach happiness because you got to keep buying more stuff. Right. And same with social media. You got 1 million followers. Well, that's cool, but you need 10 million.
Right.
And 10 million might be cool, but you probably need 25 million. Right. And so, half of my DMs that I get are people trying to get me to pay for them to get me 10,000 followers. I'm like, I don't want 10,000 followers. If I got 1,000 people that kind of know me in my city, I'm doing all right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Let
me ask you another question. I want to know what you think about this. Statistically speaking, if you are a young person, you're in high school, you can avoid a few pitfalls. Okay. If you can avoid having children before 21, okay. If you can avoid dropping out of high school, okay. And if you can hold down a full-time job, if you can just do those 3 things, there's a 75% chance that you'll make it to the middle class.
There you go.
You do those 3 things. If you don't do anything else, just avoid having children, hold down a full-time job, and graduate high school, right? And now we know that if you aren't able to do those things, the likelihood that you're going to live a life of poverty is also 75%.
Wow.
Right? But it's so fundamental. I put it to people like this. If financial literacy was something that was talked about in your house, it was preached, it was part of your culture on a daily basis, what's the likelihood you're going to have unprotected sex? If you're really thinking about money every single day, if you're
Yep.
thinking about how can I acquire wealth, how can I make the next step, how can I prepare for the next phase of my life, what's the likelihood you're going to have unprotected sex or have sex recklessly?
Yep.
What's the likelihood that you're going to allow yourself to flunk out of high school? If you're really thinking about these things on a daily basis, it's part of your culture. It's part of your identity. What's the likelihood you're going to happen, right? Seriously thinking about money, what's the likelihood that you have no capacity to hold a job, even if it's something fundamental, basic, something entry level,
What do you
right?
think? What do you think about this trend where people are saying, "Hey, don't think about money. Don't do things for money. Chase happiness. Do follow your dreams and things like that." You get these messages, but there's got to be a caveat with that, don't you think?
Okay, so my smart aleck response is that's something broke people say.
That's what something which people say.
That's something broke people say. I don't subscribe to that at all. Okay, and I don't mean to be tongue I'm not be a jerk here, but no, that's not something I subscribe to at
No, I
all.
mean that's something also that like life coaches will spew, right? I mean, there's a lot of life coaches. It's a booming business. Hey, pursue your
Okay.
dreams. Let me help you achieve them. We'll create goals for you.
Right, right. No, I just don't buy into into the premise that you can avoid doing things that are challenging, that you can avoid transforming yourself into a hardworking individual doing things that are difficult in order to accomplish what you want. Like, look, I think sometimes it happens, and we over romanticize the exceptions to everything. Right? We all know one person that has done what they really truly loved, their hobby, and they've been able to monetize that and turn that into a multi-million-dollar business. We all have that exception, but that's not the reality. That's not the reality for the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people that I know that are really successful, they may enjoy what they do, but they work insanely hard at it. And it's not always doing things that they like. It's not always doing things that they want to do.
Correct.
Um, I just
Yeah,
think
that's exactly right. I think that we get jaded by, oh, if it's not making you happy, then quit it and do something else. I'm like, no, there's going to be some pain along the way. And there's things that you're going to have to accomplish. Guess what? If you're going to build a fence, you got to start digging holes. It
right.
sucks to dig a hole. That's
And
not fun
that's a
for anyone.
generational thing.
Right.
It's a generational psychology that is plaguing Gen Zers and plaguing millennials. Is if I'm not loving what I'm doing immediately, then I'm done and I'm quitting.
Yeah,
Right.
I've failed at life, and I need to, go back to my Instagram people that I follow and sell makeup or do makeup for a living or be a cultural icon or whatever it's going to be. It's hard to
Absolutely.
do. It's hard to do that stuff. And I think that there's got to be something to be said about the stoicism, right? The fact that maybe you can be content, right? Instead of chasing happiness all the time. I had this conversation with someone the other day. When you say what does this make me happy? That makes the implication that you're not currently happy, right? And this is also one of these binary things where these feelings can be really manipulative and manipulated by advertisers, by media, by the things that you consume visually on your computer, on your feeds, whatever it is, that teach you that you have to be chasing happiness.
Well, I think definitely. I think it comes down to your definition of happiness, right? I like to use the word fulfillment more than anything, but I look at it like this. You can. Mark Cuban says, "Follow your effort." Right? He says, "Follow your effort." You might talk to somebody and they're like, "Okay, well, what do you want to do? What's your passion?" Well, my passion is singing, dancing, and entertaining. Right? But then the next question should be, well, what's your talent? Right? If you can't sing, you can't dance, and you're not an entertainer, you don't have any talent for those things. Well, shouldn't that be part of the question? Shouldn't that be part of the discussion? Right? Where's your talent at? Right? And whatever
Yeah.
your talent is, like, okay, double down on that. That makes sense. Not necessarily what is the thing you want to spend all of your time doing, but where's your talent?
Right.
Right? And I don't know we spend enough time evaluating those things on a personal level, on a self-introspective level, and even on a professional level. Like, that should be things that high school students talk about, and they should get counsel on that.
True. That's interesting. You mentioned that there's a friend of mine in Germany started a program called 1 Week Student, and it's set up for high schoolers to shadow various college students for up to a week to get a feel for if they like that lifestyle, if they like that
Mhm.
major that they're pursuing, if they like that career path that person's going into before you commit to signing up for a bunch of classes for the next 4 years and paying X tens of thousands of dollars towards that education, because sometimes you don't know until you practice it a little bit, right? That's why
Absolutely.
experiencing it, trying it out, internships, et cetera, can be good ways to figure out what you want to do in life.
Absolutely.
I've had that same advice told to me when I was nearly 30 years old. It's like, hey, figure out which activity that you like to do, right? If you like to dig holes, then you got to get a job where you dig holes. But if you like to be behind a computer, then you figure out which jobs put you behind a computer. If you like to
Absolutely.
go, shake hands and meet people all day, then figure out a job that does that, right? So you got to figure out the activities that you like, and then you can find jobs that fit that role pretty well, which is
Absolutely.
another way to kind of career counselor someone into it. But you can't know that until you try it, right? You
100%.
you won't know if you could be a great public speaker that someone will pay you $10 to $100,000 per shot if you can't get in front of people and talk to people. But it's something that you could practice and get better. And like Mark Cuban says, follow your effort, right? You get better at things that you do good at, right? With MMA,
Absolutely.
first time someone's getting thrown on that mat, they're probably going to be in a world of pain and get pinned pretty quickly. I'm assuming you're nice to them though, and
Sure.
then they'll ideally get better.
Right.
Like,
Right.
ideally they'll
No,
get better.
I like what you're saying there. One of my mentors, his name is Darren. He's a martial artist, and you know, he consistently points out that this particular generation is afraid of evolution. And what I mean by that is, he always tells me like things evolve. Like you just have to you have to put things into action to allow them to evolve. But if you don't put anything into action, nothing can evolve. And what I've found about this generation is they're afraid of that evolution, right? They're afraid to try something that doesn't seem perfect for them and allow it to turn into or manifest into something that ultimately yields, amazing outcomes. Like for martial arts, for me, like I never saw myself as an educator. I never saw myself as a teacher. I love what I do today, but when I was 19 years old, this was the last thing that I thought I was going to do, right? But I did a little bit of coaching, I did a little bit of teaching, I got a little bit better at it. I read some books, and then as I got better, as I started to improve my competency in these areas, I started to like it more, and it became part of my identity, and I became a different person just through the evolution. But I found that younger people, they're not into that evolution. If it's not perfect on day one, exactly the thing that I want to do, they don't want to do it.
This is I'm assuming you watch a little bit of Shark Tank as well, and you see these guys hustle, right? And a lot of these people, when they start to pursue their dream and they still have a job, I mean, they still do their job and they pursue their dream in nights and evenings, right? And
Sure.
weekends and things like that, where they can just crank it out until they can figure out how it can take over.
5 to 9.
I had one of my guys come in earlier this week. He started a construction concrete business that he works through my company with. And he left his day job after 15 plus years of working for them. And just a few months ago, he left the day job to pursue this business that he's building, with partnership with me on his own. And he's kicking butt, which is great. But, it took a leap, right? He was doing nights and weekends for years before he finally quit his job 6 months ago. And now he's doing it full time. And he's like, yeah, it's enough to sustain me. And I can see it going places, and I'm putting in the effort. And he's literally out in East County pouring concrete for 8 hours a day in 100+ degree weather sometime.
Wow.
That's not easy labor, right? That's
Right.
not easy stuff. But he's pursuing his dreams of having his own business, and he can see it going someplace. And he's out there doing backbreaking labor as a result. But it takes hard work. Nothing comes easy, right? No one just shows up one day and says, "Oh, there's money in my bank account." You got to do something for that.
Absolutely.
So Will, what's our takeaway? How do we give people financial literacy? Do we just encourage them to go figure it out themselves? Go YouTube something? Is there a book they can read? Can you go to a community college and sign up for some financial literacy classes? Because it's not accounting, right? Accounting is different.
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think so much of this, I think what you focus on tends to expand in your conscious, right? So much of it is focusing on the right things. Like if we just, instead of stared in this direction all day long, looked in this direction, right? The trajectory of our day is going to be so different. And I think today people are staring in the wrong direction 90% of the day, right? They're staring at the government, right? Why isn't the government doing what I want the government to do, which is in my best interest, right?
Yeah.
It's prejudice, it's racism, right? I'm negatively impacted by prejudice. I'm negatively impacted by racism, and that's the reason why I can't accomplish my goals. I'm not suggesting that the government is not doing the right things. I'm not suggesting that racism is not negatively or prejudice not negatively impacting your outcomes. I'm just suggesting if you spend all day focused in this direction, right, you're not going to be able to see all of the opportunities that are right in front of you. And I feel like the vast majority of people today that are not getting the outcomes that they want are spending all day looking this way.
Yeah.
Right. And if they just looked forward, right, and just quieted the voice in their mind that says, this is what's holding me back. This is the story that's holding me back, whether it's the government or whether it's presidents or whether it's racism or whether it's the person next to them. And they just focused on making money, right? Because if you're thinking about making money, you're less likely to make a bunch of immature, undisciplined decisions. I think their outcomes would be significantly better. Just focusing people in the right direction, I think that's going to change everything.
That's huge advice, and I think it's. Tell me if I'm on along those same lines. I always tell people that you can have an external or an internal locus of control, right? If you think that everything out there is against you and the system is rigged and you've had bad luck and if only things were different, well, yeah, you're going to have the victim card, right? That's the external locus of control. But if you look internally and say, hey, whatever it is, I'm here at this moment, the present, the gift that is this moment, and I can change my future regardless of what's happened, regardless of whatever kind of systemic issues I've had, regardless of the past, regardless of any biases against me or what I perceive are issues against me. Let's take it on because someone else has done it, right? I'm
Right.
not the pioneer getting shot in the back with the arrows. Someone else has done it. I'm going to be able to do it too, right?
Absolutely.
And that's a different kind of mindset of thinking that I can do it. It's up here. If I can get my mind to agree and get my feet to move, it's going to get
Right.
accomplished. But if I keep blaming the government or the system or my neighbors or whatever bad luck I had or the fact that I've got a birthmark or who knows, whatever the heck whatever you've got as an excuse,
Right.
you've got an external locus of control. You got to internalize that and say, hey, this is excuses you're making, right? Those are the limiting beliefs that you have, thinking
Right.
that
Right.
someone else is in charge of your own destiny
Absolutely. I
as
think
opposed to
what
yourself.
people get offended is when, someone like myself might minimize those things. And my intention is not to minimize those things and not to suggest that they're not present, they're not real, they're not impacting your life. They're all there. But let's assume that all of those things are impacting your life. Now what? Right? What aspect of this equation can you control? You might not be able to control who's your teacher, but you can control your study habits. You can control your study skills. You can control how much effort you put in, right? And I think if we can get people to focus on the part of it, as you said, that you can control, right, we're going to have much better outcomes.
That's it. So the goal is we got to get people's financial literacy up, especially kids, young people, before you take on mountains of debt, before you start spending all your money on things that you shouldn't probably have purchased because it's not a priority. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's also advice like no one's that impressed by your fancy shoes. And
Let me
if
ask you
they
a
are,
question.
like, do you really want to impress that person that's impressed by your fancy shoes?
Right. Let me ask you this. If you were to take everything that you've learned, financially and condense that into like 3 points, right, to a high schooler, right? The most important points, the most fundamental points. Like, what would you tell a high schooler that's about to start making financial decisions? If you could just synthesize it all into like a few things, like what would you say?
I saw this. I went to the watch store down the street and I had to get a battery replaced in my dad's watch. He's like, hey, can you do me a favor? Get my bat. And he had the sign up as an old guy that is a watchmaker, right? Of course, he's like 60 plus years old, whatever. He's lived the life. He's like, I consider myself rich because I make more money than I spend. And that's it.
I
That's
like that.
all you need to do
Yep.
is spend less money than you make. That's it. Just spend less money.
Yeah. I like it.
Figure out how much money you make and then figure out how much you can spend and save some of that. Please,
Right.
please save some of that for a rainy day. Whether it's 1%, 10%, 50%, doesn't matter.
Right. That's great advice. And it doesn't matter what level of, financial sophistication you're at, right? That resonates with everybody. 5-year-old who got $10 for the birthday, right? Or, the most sophisticated investor, pay yourself first, right?
Yeah. Yes. Pay your expenses and save some of it. Right. And then that's it. Just don't spend more money than you have.
There you go.
That's all I'd say. Will, any other last thoughts before we wrap this up? Because that was a great conversation.
No, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. I appreciate, giving me the platform, to say, some of the things that I've been thinking, and I hope it helps people. At the end of the day, that's why I'm here.
Yeah. Spreading awareness. We want people to say, hey, look into this because if you don't understand how it works, there's people that can help you. And if you don't know people that can help you, we can point you in the right direction and give you some tips and examples and books. I'm sure that would be steps in the right direction.
100%.
Will, thank you for joining me on another great episode of I've Got a Theory. I'm your host, Henish. Please like, comment, subscribe, share with your friends. Thanks for joining me on the show.
All right. Thank you, sir. Pleasure meeting you.